When the cracks in my life first appeared, they were so faint, so easy to ignore, that I didn't give them a second thought. I was too busy, too wrapped up in the day-to-day grind, to notice the subtle shifts beneath the surface. At first, it all seemed manageable. I had a routine that kept me anchored. Work, relationships, the small goals that made each day pass by. But cracks, no matter how small, have a way of growing. Slowly, piece by piece, my carefully constructed life started to unravel. It wasn't an explosion or a sudden event that threw everything off course. It was the steady accumulation of countless little choices, each one adding a bit more weight until the pressure was too much to bear. I told myself everything was fine. I was moving forward, handling problems as they came, believing that if I just kept going, things would eventually get better. But life has a way of proving you wrong. You think you're in control, that you can outsmart the chaos by planning ahead, by staying focused. But life doesn't care about your plans. It has its own rhythm, and it will shift when you least expect it, leaving you unbalanced and uncertain. I didn't notice the turning point at first. It crept up on me slowly, like a distant storm on the horizon, barely a threat until it's right over your head. At work, I was managing, barely, but still getting through the days. At home, things felt routine, maybe a little strained, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. I thought I had time. I thought I could figure it all out before anything truly fell apart. But the truth was, things were already falling apart. I just hadn't realized it yet. Every decision I made, every step I took, was pushing me further from the life I thought I was building. And then, one day, the cracks split wide open, and everything I'd built came crashing down around me. There wasn't a single moment that I could point to as the reason why. It wasn't one argument, one bad decision, one person. It was all of it. A lifetime of small, seemingly inconsequential choices had finally caught up to me, and now I was standing in the ruins, wondering how I hadn't seen it coming. How had I been so blind to the inevitable collapse of everything I thought I knew? Looking back, it seems obvious now. The signs were all there, but I had been too wrapped up in my own plans, too focused on the next step, to realize that the ground beneath me was already crumbling. And when the fall finally came, I wasn't prepared. The life I thought I had built, the job, the marriage, the sense of stability was gone, leaving me with nothing but questions and the quiet realization that I had let it all slip away without even noticing. When I reflect on how it all started, I can't pinpoint one exact moment. It was a series of small, seemingly unimportant choices that snowballed into something much bigger. One day I was just living my life, going to work, dealing with the daily grind. The next, things began to unravel, slowly at first, until my entire world fell apart. There wasn't a single person or event to blame. It was a mix of circumstances, decisions I'd made, and I guess, fate. At the time, I didn't realize how deeply those decisions would shape my future. I just went through the motions, tackling one problem after another, convincing myself the next step would be better. My job, my marriage, my social life, they all seemed manageable until suddenly they weren't. Looking back now, I can see how naive that thinking was. Everything was a ticking bomb, waiting to explode, and when it did, I was left standing in the aftermath, trying to understand how I ended up here. Julie paused briefly at the door, her eyes meeting mine with a soft smile. "See you tomorrow, Braden?" "Absolutely." She kissed me gently on the cheek, her perfume lingering as she twirled and walked toward the hallway. I watched her graceful figure heading for the elevator, even turning to wave one last time. She was stunning. There was no denying it. Once she disappeared, I closed the door behind me. That's when it started. "Isn't she a bit young for you?" I stopped, staring at the closed door, almost expecting to see my reflection. For a moment I thought maybe it was over. Maybe I had finally let go. The anger wasn't as strong as before. I felt calm, almost resigned. "Yeah, she's young, but I wouldn't know anything else about that, Melanie." I walked past her without a second glance, heading toward the kitchen, suddenly craving a drink. I opened the fridge, taking stock of its contents. The fruits and veggies I liked, the chicken thawing for dinner. But I wasn't in the mood to cook anymore. Yogurt, milk, energy drinks, and beer. I grabbed one of the 7 bottles left from the case I'd bought nearly a month ago, a far cry from the pace I'd kept during the first year after my divorce. I heard her following, her heels clicking in contrast to my bare feet. I opened the bottle and placed it on the stainless steel counter. I tossed the cap in the trash where it belonged. Everything was in its place, just like always. neat, orderly, clean. I crossed the large open spaces. Kitchen, dining room, office, bedroom, gym, living room. The furniture was all high-end, but nothing matched. The living room was no exception. Two stiff black leather chairs on one side, separated by a metal end table and a crystal lamp. A chocolate leather love seat facing the massive 60-inch TV, paired with a glass-topped coffee table. But my favorite piece was the recliner. Plush tan leather, big enough for my 6'4" frame, comfortable enough to sleep in. Nothing matched, but everything had a story. Everything fit, except her. Not even going to offer me a drink? Melanie's voice snapped me back to reality. It was the first time I really looked at her. She'd shown up unannounced. It was the first time I'd seen her in 8 years. I was honest enough to admit she looked good, beautiful even. But then, she always had. It was her other qualities I had trouble with. I don't want you thinking your presence is welcome. You're not my guest. If you want something, find it yourself. I watched her spin on her heels and head to the kitchen. I missed that body. It was perfect, and she knew it. That's why she often wore skirts that practically screamed, "Yeah, I know you're looking." My eyes trailed from her hips down her long, toned legs, ending at her expensive 4-inch heels. My primal instincts took over as I imagined her bending over, more for my pleasure than to find whatever she was searching for. I waited for the usual feelings of longing, pain, or heartache that came with seeing something that was no longer yours, something that had been taken, but instead I felt something else. Pride, maybe. It was more of a, yeah, I've been there moment. She returned with her usual wine glass and a bottle of Chardonnay, her expression calm, masking her true intentions. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of that. "You look good, Braden." "I feel good, Melanie." The game had begun, and for once, it felt good not to be on the defensive. "You're not even going to ask why I'm here? You're not curious?" "It's not that I'm not curious. One can never have too much information." Her smirk told me she thought we were evenly matched. "I just don't care." Even in the most unexpected situations, Melanie had an uncanny ability to keep a straight face. I had seen it many times, so it felt good to notice her slight wince, even if it was just for a second. She turned toward the wall, a massive 18-foot span filled with framed pictures from my journey. It was a floor-to-ceiling reminder of how I got here and the lessons I had learned. "Rock bottom," I said. "That's where I started after you divorced me and wrecked my life." I won't pretend our marriage was perfect. It wasn't. We had a tough time, mostly because we were always broke. But we were young, hopeful, impulsive, and committed. Our marriage didn't fall apart early on because we didn't believe it could. I mean, soulmates don't give up on each other, right? She stayed silent, her eyes still on the pictures. I thought back to the time we scraped up enough change to split a fast food meal on our first anniversary. I could still picture that fake Christmas tree we found in the trash behind our apartment, and how we made paper ornaments for it. She laminated them the following year, and we hung them every Christmas after that. I continued, "Even when you love someone, they can still get on your nerves. You used to rearrange everything. Kitchen utensils, spices, the hall closet. It never made sense to me, but just when I get used to it, you'd move it all again." She didn't say anything, but I knew she was listening. "Remember how you could never find anything after you rearranged it?" I asked, a small smile forming. "Where are the scissors, Han? In the drawer somewhere." "They're not where they were last week." "Did you move them?" And you'd always answer, "Probably. Keep looking." I shook my head. I had to go buy whatever was missing if I needed it right away. But even the constant mess in the kitchen didn't make me think about how broke we were. Probably because of the Zex. Whenever we were alone, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. She was insatiable, and so was I. 5 minutes alone, anywhere, anytime, and we'd be undressed. I loved how desperate her voice sounded when I teased her. And afterward, I'd watch her body recover, her skin glowing with a sheen of sweat. Her body was perfection, young, soft, voluptuous. It was impossible to resist. And those crystal blue eyes, the ones that told me I was about to get lucky, made it even better. Those memories, the important ones, kept me going for a long time after the divorce. After the dust settled, and I put the cap on the bottle for good, I had an epiphany. Those rough years when we didn't know how we'd pay the rent taught me something. Together, we could survive anything. But for you, Melanie, those years were a nightmare. You swore you'd never live like that again, no matter what. Her eyes flicked back to the pictures, lingering a little longer this time. I could tell she was thinking about the places we had always dreamed of visiting together, places I ended up seeing on my own. She was the picture of sensuality, her wine glass dangling from her fingers as she studied the photos of the life I had built after her. "So, you really traveled to all those places?" she asked softly. "I did," I said, watching her. She was trying to guess my next move, but the truth was, I didn't have one. "You've changed." "I doubt that," I replied. "Actually, I'm certain I haven't. I'm the same person I've always been, just more me and a lot less you." She smirked, but I could see she was struggling to keep it together. "You never would have said something like that to me before." Life is full of things we want to say but don't. We get lost in the silence, or we lose the person we should have been. I spent a long time searching for answers, and I realized that sometimes we try to be the person we think we are, until someone shows us the truth in the mirror. Some of us handle it better than others. "Maybe," she whispered, her smirk fading. "What's different now?" she asked. "There's nothing left for you to take from me, Melanie. We're not connected anymore, so you can't hurt me." She opened her mouth to respond, but the lump in her throat stopped her. For a moment, I wanted to believe she was genuinely affected, but I knew better. "I want you to make it stop," she finally said. "I didn't start it, but you could end it." "I'm not sure that's true," I replied, my voice steady. "And even if it was, I'm not sure I would." "Are you enjoying this?" "Not particularly. I'm not interested in being reminded that the person I loved most in the world turned out to be a lying, cheating witch." My words hit harder than I expected, and I saw it in her eyes. For the first time, I had wounded her. She stood there quietly, processing what I'd said. But I had learned something important. Never interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake. Sun Tzu Napoleon. I had been completely unprepared for the devastation she unleashed on me during our first battle. I wasn't ready this time either, but at least now I wasn't alone. The rumors had started months ago. Everywhere I went, people whispered. The economy was crumbling. Any job was worth gold, and layoffs were coming. Walking the factory floor was bad enough. Eyes followed me. People stopped to ask if I'd seen the list. But what I faced at home was much worse. Melanie was nearly frantic, asking me every day if I'd heard anything. Did I still have a job? Was I sure? What's the plan? What were we going to do? I didn't have a plan. I didn't think I needed one. My boss was a good guy, and he had my back. He looked me in the eye and told me not to worry, so I didn't. It would have been fine if he had been the one making the final decisions, but others got involved. If there were warning signs, I missed them. In hindsight, I noticed some things too late. Our Zek's life had slowed down. I thought it was stress. I wasn't in the mood like I used to be, and I figured that was my fault more than hers. But Melanie knew before I did. I hadn't even stepped foot in the house when I was laid off. My boss was shocked as he told me the man with the best team production and quality ratings was being let go. Melanie wasn't even surprised. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only long-term commitment that was about to crash and burn. She gave me no signs our marriage was in trouble. She played the perfect wife. Loving touches, kisses, making sure I was fed and keeping the house spotless. She was even more of a Susie homemaker in those last few weeks. She never let me leave a room without saying she loved me, probably to cover her guilt. Then, I was served. While waiting in line for company-provided outplacement services, I came home to find the locks changed, my clothes boxed up in the driveway, and another copy of the restraining order neatly placed on top. My severance package should have lasted months, but I had to make a choice. Use what little money I had left to fight the divorce and for custody of my daughter, or to survive. I chose to fight, but I was outmatched. Lawyers, psychologists, judges, they all decided I was mentally abusive, unfit to parent, and without the means to care for a child. I was worthless. They wrote it down, all official-like. The final blow came when I had one last desperate idea. If I could just talk to April face to face, she'd listen. At 9 years old, she was old enough to say she loved me and wanted to see me, that we were like two peas in a pod. So I stood behind the bushes, staring at what used to be my home, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. That's when I saw them for the first time. My wife, my daughter, and the company's vice president of operations. He was the son of the company's founder, a womanizer, an arrogant idiot, and one of the worst business managers I'd ever seen. But his old man was respected and everyone was loyal to him. The only life in ruins was mine and I was nobody. They all said so. He was an odd-looking man, 10 years older than me, with a growing gut, a big bank account, and my ready-made family. I admit my description was biased by my hatred. He wasn't deformed or anything, but all I could see was ugliness. That night I took my first real drink. Not my first ever, but the first one I took to drown my pain. It was a long drink. It lasted a year. It might have lasted forever, but I saw her one more time. I was wandering the streets, disheveled, unshaven, in dirty clothes, with a stench that preceded me wherever I went. I was just a few weeks from being homeless, if you could call my decaying studio apartment in a near-condemned pre-war building a home. She was coming out of a boutique downtown, bags weighing her down as she searched her designer purse for the keys to her luxury SUV. I must have scared her. In fact, I know I did. She was frozen for a moment, unsure whether to protect her things or her body. The drunken haze that shielded me from reality meant she was in no danger from me. It took me way too long to recognize her. Her shocked, "Oh my God," and the way she covered her mouth before speeding off finally registered minutes later. A few minutes after that, I stole a beer from a convenience store. That's why I was looking for the bottle opener. I was too stupid to grab a bottle with a twist-off cap, and Melanie had rearranged the kitchen again for no good reason. I couldn't find the opener. After breaking a bottle and dumping out almost all the drawers onto the floor, I found it. But there was no Melanie. It wasn't our home anymore. And the opener was right where I left it, where it should have been. Everything was in its place. I quit drinking that day and left town the next, with a backpack holding everything I owned and just under $50. It wasn't hard to stop. I wasn't in booze dependent. I was a broken man hiding in a bottle and failing miserably. Is everything an inspirational quote with you now? Not always. Not everything is inspiring. Sometimes things are just a reminder of where we've been. What the hell, Brayden? What does that even mean? I have no clue what it means to you, but honestly, I have no interest in explaining what anything means to me, especially to you. The first time I wandered for 18 months, I walked, hitchhiked, and occasionally took a bus. I worked random jobs until I had enough cash to move on. Money was tight, but I was fully aware of my surroundings. I set up camp wherever I ended up. There was always somewhere to sleep, shower, and grab a meal. I indulged in anything interesting I found at used bookstores, buying a dozen books for the price of one movie ticket. So I read. I wrote down whatever I wanted to remember and how I was feeling in an old spiral notebook, a diary of pain and discovery. I kept up with world events through discarded newspapers. They were often outdated, but the news didn't really affect me anyway. I talked to people, mostly listened. People love to talk, and I was a good listener. I splurged once on a well-used digital camera from a pawn shop. I took pictures to remember the places I'd been, people I'd met, and later in my journey, things that inspired me. Once a month, for about $5, a pharmacy would transfer my pictures from the memory card to a CD. After a year and a half, I settled in a small, dusty town in the middle of the country. I got my first full-time job since the divorce, working in a warehouse at a fertilizer factory. By day, I hauled manure. By night, I went to my rented room above a garage to read and write. I swapped my notebook for a used laptop and spent my free time at the library, using their internet to upload my thoughts and photos to a blog. People followed me and commented anonymously. While I wrote as a form of therapy, I enjoyed knowing people cared about what I had to say. I enjoyed it a lot. Melanie paused at the only photo I had from my old life, a strip of pictures from a booth at an amusement park. April was 4, her ponytail tied with pink ribbons, and her new earrings sparkling with fake diamonds. The bright flash couldn't outshine the smiles on our faces. The first photo was surprised, the second silly, and the last one filled with genuine laughter. "I could help you reconnect with her," Melanie said quietly. "Oh, so you're close. You know all about your daughter's life?" I could see her trying to gauge what I knew. It must have been hard for her not to have the upper hand for once. "You should be proud. She's turned out just like you," I said with a grin, watching her reaction. She was taken aback. There was shock in her eyes, and something else, maybe regret. She stared at the photo again, maybe realizing it didn't match her memories or what she'd been told. Hard to say, as she didn't comment. In my past life, I never thought of myself as a writer. I was a production supervisor at a big manufacturing company, a job I'd climbed the ranks to after 4 promotions. Writing had never been on my radar, but that didn't stop an online men's magazine from listing my blog as one of the best on the web. Soon, they offered me a monthly, then a weekly column. The pay wasn't great, but it opened doors. 2 years later, an email from a publishing company caught me off guard. They wanted more of my work, though I hadn't written a book. I sent them a chaotic collection of essays, and they paired me with an editor who asked for a first chapter on how my journey began. So I shared my story for the first time. Then, nothing happened for a few years. I assumed it wasn't good enough, but I kept writing. My column's popularity grew, the money got better, but I was bored. So I left again, this time heading to Europe. There are no hostels for 35-year-old men, no cheap train tickets, but I traveled the continent as frugally as I could. I saw places I'd only read about in textbooks or seen on TV. I visited historical sites and soaked in traditions. I didn't stop. From Europe, I made my way to the Middle East, then India. I spent 3 months in Asia, immersing myself in new languages, cultures, and food. That's where I saw true poverty, not the kind I'd once cursed. But the people were the same. Everywhere, people liked to talk. After 14 months, I was ready to return to the US when another email arrived, with a preview of my book cover attached. That's when things got interesting. I flew home to a whirlwind of agents, editors, publishers, and lawyers. My column's growing popularity had sparked interest in my book, and I leveraged that buzz to negotiate a raise from the magazine based on a complicated ad revenue formula. It was more than I'd ever made and enough to be content. So I returned to my hometown to start fresh, in the place I had grown up and missed. Unfortunately, my book's release met with an average response, far from what some had hoped for. I wasn't surprised. Most of my sales probably came from my loyal blog and column followers, but the lukewarm reception likely meant my writing career would end before it truly began. Then he went on television and called my first chapter a bunch of lies. A local reporter from my hometown asked him the questions. Was the story in my book really true? Had he taken my job, stolen my wife and daughter, and spread lies about me in court? He could have said nothing. He should have said nothing, but he didn't. In most places, the story barely caused a stir. But in my hometown, the son of a wealthy businessman and the ex-wife of an author made for juicy gossip. Whether out of embarrassment or arrogance, he overplayed his hand. He sued me for libel and defamation. That was all the publishing company needed. They had already invested time and money vetting my book, and even more in editing, design, production, and distribution. So when the opportunity came to recoup some of that investment, they jumped on it. They unleashed a team of high-priced lawyers and PR professionals on my former employer. I watched from the sidelines. This wasn't about him and me. It was about controversy and the free publicity that followed. His actions stirred up interest, and my book shot up the bestseller lists. Funny how life works. Some people just don't know when to quit. Did you hear the board asked for his resignation? Nope, I hadn't heard. I'm surprised he lasted this long, though. Productivity dropped 21% after his genius cuts that first year, and another 18% the next. Sales were down, morale was down. Your idiot husband was never good at running anything. I wasn't shocked that she didn't rush to defend him. She had never taken a bullet for me either. Why do I feel like you already knew? I added, looking at her. Because you're cold, calculating, and heartless, I continued. It's really too bad, though. From the papers I just signed for Julie, I think he's going to need that paycheck. That was your lawyer, I said, leaning back. She's not my anything, and she's not a lawyer. She's a paralegal. She works for the firm representing my publisher. I nodded. I keep telling you, this isn't about me. Though I'll benefit quite a bit. I guess karma really is a witch. I saw her eyes flicker with comebacks. She had so much she wanted to say, but I could also see she realized she was out of ammo, that I had the upper hand in every way. I hoped she'd give me the chance to use some of the one-liners I'd been holding on to, but at the same time, I wished she would just leave me alone. So, why are you here? I asked, tilting my head. That threw her off for a second, but she recovered quickly. Oh, now you're curious. No, I just don't understand what you think you're going to accomplish. He should be grateful you love him enough to try to salvage what's left of his crumbling empire, but like I said, it's really not up to me. I watched her reaction closely. It was exactly what I expected. But it's not him you love, is it? It's his money. The words flowed out smoothly, and I saw them land hard. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, the irony, he had it. But now, in the most ironic twist, he'll have to give it to me. And once again, you'll end up with nothing. What? You don't think you can find another rich sugar daddy to screw for money? I think you're underselling yourself. You've still got a hot body. You'll land on your feet, or probably, in your case, on your back. It wasn't like that, she snapped, her voice cracking just a little. I laughed harder than I had in years. Wasn't it? Come on, Melanie. You can't possibly think it was any different. But her defensive body language and the look in her eyes told me she did. I was briefly stunned. Could she really not know? Was that even possible? Oh my God, she doesn't know. You don't know, do you? I asked, lowering my voice, more serious now. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She shot back, her voice trembling slightly. I stayed silent for a while, quickly running through the timeline. Interviews, depositions, discovery motions. It was all part of the public record. If she really didn't know, he certainly did. She'd find out soon enough. I wouldn't be hurting the case by telling her something that was going to come out anyway. You're right. It wasn't like that at all. I'm just talking out of turn, I said, suddenly calm. Yes, she whispered, barely audible. Sure. He was just checking in on the families of his employees, making sure everyone was prepared for the worst-case scenario. Of course, he paid special attention to mid-level management since we were the most at risk. He thought his personal attention was necessary. I spoke, but I wasn't sure what was going through her mind. Her eyes were locked on me. So he invited you to lunch to give you a heads up. Nothing had been decided yet. It was all preliminary. Every so often, he'd call to give you inside information on how the evaluations were progressing. Then, there were a few more casual lunches, a few more phone calls. But eventually, he changed his approach, didn't he? He poured his heart out, the weight of his decisions too much to handle. The stress of balancing so many lives, the things people had offered him, money, sexual favors. Melanie's eyes were wider than I had ever seen them. As I continued talking, I walked over to my desk and searched for the right file. Once I found it, I picked up where I left off. And that's when you sealed our fates. That was the moment he won, and I lost. The moment your trust in me as a man, a father, a husband, and a provider lost out to your greed. That's when you gave him your body and destroyed my entire world. I slid the papers across the table. She stared at them for a long time, as if touching them might burn her fingers. I had never actually seen the lists before and always assumed they were just rumors. But my publisher's attorneys had combed through thousands of documents during the discovery process. The first list she held wasn't particularly noteworthy, except for the fact that my name was at the top of the employees to keep. The dates showed it was one of the earliest lists produced, maybe even the first. The second list was much more interesting. The names were the same, but this one had John Davis's barely legible notes, with check marks by several names. My name, along with one other, had been crossed out with a single red line. Beside mine was a single word, Melanie. There was only one other name marked similarly. The attorneys couldn't believe he had kept it. Then again, he was always an idiot. The third list, printed on his letterhead, was marked as final. Unsurprisingly, my name was no longer on it. I watched as her eyes darted back and forth, trying to process the information. She was clearly wondering, how could he possibly know all this? She looked up at me, mouth slightly open. Dumbfounded wasn't a flattering look for her. You'll figure it out. You're not that stupid. You know exactly what I mean, I added, my voice cold. The urge for a drink hit me hard, so I got up and went to the kitchen. I dropped some ice cubes in a glass and filled it with water from the fridge. If I had learned anything, it was to never give in to my urges. Decisions made after careful thought and consideration of the consequences were always smarter. Plus, being drunk around Melanie seemed like asking for trouble. I believe sex is one of the most beautiful, natural, wholesome things that money can buy, I smirked, quoting Steve Martin as I came back into the room. Since we're being so open, I am curious about one thing. Did you ever love me? Melanie had been staring at the documents for nearly 20 minutes. At first, her grip tightened and her hands started shaking, but after a few minutes, her expression became completely stoic again. She hadn't said a word, so I decided to break the silence. Apparently, she had no intention of answering my question. She briefly met my gaze, then quickly looked away. I would have paid more attention to her, but I couldn't wrap my head around why she was even in my loft. Sure, I had questions and wanted answers, but I couldn't go there yet because her sudden appearance just didn't add up. It hadn't even been 48 hours since Mr. Moneypants' lawyers had requested a settlement conference. My attorney and the publisher's attorneys had celebrated a bit that night, seeing the move as an admission of defeat. But in a world full of sharks, these guys were the butcher whales. They didn't avoid fights. They sought them out and did everything they could to ensure a battle. Victory wasn't enough for them. They enjoyed humiliating people. I was certain none of them had read my book. Everything I had written was against what they stood for. Still, it was nice having them on my side. I had been on the other side of the table before, armed only with righteousness, and had been crushed. So yeah, I could have been labeled a hypocrite. But I didn't start this, and I was happy to go along for the ride. I was lost in these thoughts when I looked back at Melanie again. She was as beautiful as ever. I smiled, realizing I'd been right all along. I had told her for years that she'd only get more stunning with age. I honestly couldn't figure out why she dressed up for me. She looked like she was ready for a night out, or more accurately, a night on the prowl. And then it hit me. "Holy crap, he sent you here," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I don't think I'd ever seen Melanie so angry. In fact, I'm not sure I had ever seen her truly angry at all. Even during our worst arguments when we were married, she had never shown rage. Disappointed? Sure. Annoyed? Definitely. Scared? More than I realized at the time. That was why her cheating had been such a devastating blow. In a sea of unlikely outcomes, the idea of Melanie abandoning me had seemed impossibly distant. Even after all these years of self-reflection and rebuilding my confidence, I knew I would never be the same. Soulmates don't give up on each other, but mine had. He must have been desperate. The lawsuits and legal fees totaled $12 million. He was rich, but not that rich. The Sharks estimated that the judge would award around $7 million in damages. They tried to explain their calculations to me once. My book was considered property with a valuation, and his lawsuit had been frivolous. Plus, they had a mountain of evidence proving that he and his lawyer knew it. It all seemed like a game where whoever spewed the better nonsense would win. Still, his mistake wouldn't leave him broke, but it would come close. And without the cushy job he'd been handed on a silver platter, the outcome would be catastrophic. It was the only explanation that made sense. He had sent her to stop me, in one last desperate attempt to save what truly mattered to him: money. He needed a wife and family for appearances. Melanie looked up, but still didn't respond. I knew for sure she had no clue what I was talking about. I had to admire his ability to keep her in the dark. I had never been able to hide even the smallest secret from her. Guilt would have eaten me alive. I guess a conscience wasn't one of John Davis's concerns. A few members of the board had started questioning him. Why didn't he have a family? When would he stop with the string of women and the partying? They didn't care about him or the women, really, but it could be bad for the company. You can't have your future CEO wrapped up in a Zex scandal. It's bad for business. So he straight up asked Stephanie Carmichael to marry him. For the money, of course. She was already sleeping with him for cash, so he probably thought she'd just agree. Stephanie was what most people would call a strumpet. At least that was the rumor around the plant, and her husband David was what I called a fool. I never had direct knowledge of their situation, but I had heard the stories. Rumors are often just that, but with them, I believed it. Stephanie was always dressed a bit too provocatively, saying things that could be easily misconstrued. And her husband, always bragging about what a hot piece of work his wife was, practically begging other guys to admit they were checking her out. She was good looking for a former dancer, if the rumors were true. Those wild stories, one-night stands, parties, swinging, even photos and videos on the internet, seemed plausible with them. I didn't know if any of it was real, but I knew this. David Carmichael's name was the other one crossed off the list, and Stephanie's was written right next to it. David mysteriously disappeared right after he was fired. Though I always thought she was just a ditzy bleached blonde, she wasn't as dumb as she looked. She had gift tax records to prove it. 3 years' worth. He'd given her almost $150,000 for the twice-a-week treatment. Steffi, as she liked to be called, spilled all the details about Davis's seduction scheme. She made no secret about sleeping with him for money. We had an arrangement. He was generous with his gifts, and I showed him my appreciation every Tuesday and Thursday at the condo he leased for me. My husband and I were grateful for his gifts, but when Davy finished nursing school and came home, I dropped that fat prick and his tiny tool. She also had no problem explaining why Davis continued to mess around on the side for years after he married Melanie. I looked directly at Melanie as I delivered the next line. Apparently he was looking for something he wasn't getting at home, like heads. I wasn't sure Steffi had been telling the truth, until I saw Melanie's reaction. Then I knew. Of course, Steffi could have made it up, but it didn't sound like the Melanie I married. Still, I could tell Melanie was close to losing it. She hadn't spoken in almost an hour, and if I was ever going to get my revenge, it had to happen soon. "So what did he tell you when he sent you here?" I asked, leaning forward, sensing her breaking point. "He told me to get you to stop the lawsuits by any means necessary," she said, her voice low, almost defeated. "Does he pimp you out often? Or just when his fortune's on the line?" "He's not my pimp," she snapped. "He's my husband." "Hey, no judgment here. I know firsthand what that tight little body of yours can do to a man. It makes you believe things that just aren't true. So when do we get to the by any means necessary part? Because, to be honest, this persuasive argument is getting a bit dull." "What's it going to take?" she asked, her words hollow without any real conviction. For the first time, I allowed myself a small moment of pity for her. It was hard for me to understand. How could someone so beautiful, so full of life, lack so much self-worth? How could she let herself be used like this for money? I mean, I got the appeal, at least a little. My favorite chair cost over $1,000 when we first furnished our apartment. I'm sure Melanie and I didn't spend that much on everything we owned combined. Sure, it was extravagant, but it was also the most comfortable thing I'd ever sat in. Still, I knew without a doubt that I'd trade every luxury I had for just one more day with Melanie in our rundown first apartment to have things back the way they were. But I guess that just made us different people. I looked at her, seeing how her once vibrant confidence had faded, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Like I said before, even if I could stop it, I wouldn't. I broke the silence. "You should go back to your husband and tell him I wasn't interested in his offer. Take your sorry self back, sit down with him, and figure out how you're going to get through this rough patch. I'm sure with a love as strong as yours, you'll make it." I watched her closely. I watched those lips I used to love kissing, her silk blouse slightly revealing the delicate, likely expensive undergarments underneath. It took every bit of willpower not to sleep with her. After all, soulmates never give up on each other, right? I waited for the tear, but it never came. Sure, her eyes welled up, and for a second I thought she might let them fall, but she didn't. I had to give her credit for that. "Get out of my house and don't ever bring your cheating self back," I said with finality, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "Sex without love is a meaningless experience. But as far as meaningless experiences go, it's pretty damn good," I quoted Woody Allen, though she barely reacted. Our conversation had lasted hours, but I hadn't planned on sleeping with her. Honestly, I hadn't given it much thought. Too many other things were swirling in my mind. The previous weeks had been full of surprises, but she was beautiful, and I was a man, and she did make the offer. "What's a girl got to do to get a refill around here?" she asked, breaking the silence again. I took her glass and refilled it with her wine of choice, bringing it back with the bottle and setting it down beside her. "I read your book, twice," she said, her voice now more serious. I would have responded with something witty or offered a genuine thank you if I hadn't been distracted by the sight in front of me. I would have found the words if I hadn't been lamenting that I missed the moment when her blouse disappeared. Luckily, I was just in time to see her slip out of her skirt, and I couldn't help but wonder if all those adventures, all that self-discovery made you better in bed. "I've been told I'm fairly impressive," I smirked. "Oh, I don't doubt it," she replied, her voice sultry, as if nothing between us had ever been broken. We made love. I collapsed onto her, exhausted, her fingers gently tracing my spine, pulling me from my post-bliss haze. "Jesus Christ, Brayton, your ex was an idiot," she whispered. "Oh, Julie, you say the sweetest things," I replied, smiling lazily as I lay beside her. "The best revenge is to live on and prove yourself," I muttered, quoting Eddie Vedder, my words lost in the afterglow. Julie stayed with me every night for the next 4 months while the lawsuits played out in probate court. We had sex like newlyweds the entire time. She always reminded me, though, that no matter how great the sex was, she was going back to New York once the lawsuits were settled. I didn't blame her. Sharks like her, fresh out of law school, don't stick around in the shallow end, no matter how often they hook up with you. Still, the time we spent together was amazing. At first night, she was at my condo explaining the latest lawsuit, one from my daughter, suing me to protect her inheritance. I can't say I didn't know Melanie was angry when she left that night. She was furious, but I assumed she was mad at me, maybe for turning her down or for taking what she thought she had rightfully earned. Apparently, I was wrong. I can't imagine what it was like for him. I know how devastated I was when Melanie didn't choose me over something as simple as a corporate downsizing. But the coroner's report was inconclusive. John Davis may have never known. Hours after she left, Melanie tragically took his life with a single shot, then turned the weapon on herself. He bled out quickly. They said she likely died instantly, but no one could say for sure if he lived long enough to realize she'd rather eliminate herself than have sex with him once he was poor. I can't imagine what that must have felt like, but I hope he had at least a moment to think about it. I spent days being angry at Melanie, not for what she did to me, but for her daughter's sake. As messed up as Melanie was, her daughter needed her. No, April hadn't given me any indication they were close. Probably the opposite. Still, she was a lost little girl. The one time she came to see me, she didn't remember me. Not the real me, at least. That surprised me. I thought she'd be old enough to recall. But memories get replaced by lies when you hear them enough. She didn't believe me when I said we were once happy, that we were once a family. Now there was no one left who could confirm it. One picture on a wall full of hundreds didn't and wouldn't change her mind. She was bitter at Melanie's funeral, which I understood. Unfortunately, months later, I was still enemy number one with no hope of changing her mind. When the ruling came down and her inheritance was essentially lost, she stormed out of the courtroom, barely avoiding a contempt charge for her profanity-filled tirade. That was the last I saw of her, and I don't hold much hope of seeing her again. The bond I had hoped we would always have seemed as fragile as the one between her mother and me. But maybe fathers and daughters are different. Maybe the Davises didn't completely poison her against me, and maybe one day she'll realize she can always count on her dad. Or maybe she'll find her way in the world. Perhaps she'll find her soulmate, someone who won't give up on her. As I sit here, looking back on everything, I realize that life isn't some neat, packaged experience with a predictable ending. It's messy, it's complicated, but it's also full of moments that define who we are, even when we don't know it at the time. That's what this story has been. A series of choices, some small and others monumental, shaping everything I am now. I used to think that I was a sufferer of fate, that the collapse of my marriage, my career, and my sense of identity was something that happened to me. But now I see it differently. It's not about what happens to us, it's about what we do in response. I've made mistakes, but I've also learned to take responsibility for them. That's what I didn't understand back then. We all have the power to rebuild, even when it feels like the ground has crumbled beneath us. Melanie. There's so much to say about her, and yet nothing at all. I loved her once, deeply. We shared something real, and maybe part of me will always wonder if we could have made it. But I know now that love isn't enough to overcome betrayal or the slow erosion of trust. She played her role in my downfall, but in truth, it was my own blindness that allowed things to get so far. She wasn't the villain in my story. Neither was John Davis. They were just people, flawed and broken like the rest of us, trying to navigate their own lives. In the end, it was greed and pride that brought them both down. And the irony of it all is that I've walked away from this mess stronger, while they've been destroyed by it. Julie, well, she was never going to stay, but she gave me something I didn't realize I needed, a reminder that there's more out there for me. Her presence was a fleeting comfort, and maybe that's all it was meant to be. I'll never forget those months we spent together, but I'm not naive enough to think that she was anything more than a temporary balm for old wounds. Now, as I look at where I am, I see the path that led me here wasn't a straight line. It twisted and turned through heartache, loss, discovery, and eventually peace. I've traveled the world, seen things most people only dream of, and somewhere along the way, I found something resembling closure. Not with Melanie, not with John, and not even with my daughter. That will take time, maybe more than I have. But with myself, that's where the real journey ends. I don't expect April to come back into my life. She's young, angry, and has her own demons to face. But if she ever does, I'll be here. I'll be ready to tell her the truth if she's willing to hear it. Until then, I'll keep living, keep writing, and keep proving that the best revenge isn't about tearing someone down. It's about rising up, rising from nothing. And I did rise. From the ashes of a life I thought I had lost, I've built something new, something strong. Maybe that's the lesson I needed to learn all along, that no matter how far we fall, there's always a way back. You just have to be willing to fight for it. So, what's next? I don't know. But for the first time in a long time, I'm not afraid of the unknown, because I faced the worst of it, and I came out the other side intact. Maybe even better. And that's something no one can ever take from me.